Hello again. One more video for you this week. I want to talk about grammar a little bit here. I think you've seen throughout the course that I am not a grammar person. That I've talked before about how when it comes to writing, we need to have our priorities straight, right? We need to know like what are the most important things for having a good essay, And I think grammar is pretty far down that list. I think obviously the thesis, organization, using quotes, intro, conclusion, paragraphing, all of that I think is much more important than grammar. But at the same time, I'm aware that you will probably have other professors who love grammar, who just love to, give students terrible grades for not having commas in the right places and not capitalizing the right things. I don't know. I think that says something about that kind of professor. I think there's something psychologically going on with them. I don't know why they hate their students. It's weird. But yeah, so I think I've tried to, play down grammar enough because I think that that helps people become better writers when they stop worrying about grammar so much and start worrying about the argument that they're making and the evidence that they have and these types of things. So with all that being said, I will finally give you your grammar episode. um, So I'm going to answer some of your questions, and I'm going to talk about. You should read through that document that I posted, grammar explanations, because I created this. I did type that all of that myself. Those are all of my thoughts and things, and I did that because I just think it works better to like see the examples right there in front of you, So I didn't. I thought that would be better than me just like saying all of this out loud because then I have to like say the examples or I'd have to insert them into the video, which I do like doing, but it takes an incredibly long time for me to do that. And it takes a huge amount of time for the videos to, upload and shit when I put pictures in them. So I'm not going to do that. Um, but I am going to talk about grammar here. All right, so let me start with your questions, and then I'll move on to. I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but maybe I'll just talk about a couple of what I think are like the most confusing parts of that grammar explanations sheet. All right, so your questions. Someone asked, would you say that non-essential clauses should be avoided or used less? So non-essential clauses, as you'll see, I have that listed as one of my situations where we need a comma, right? Um, just read my little definition here. A non-essential clause is a fancy name for this thing where in the middle of a sentence you want to give some additional info, but it isn't really necessary. So the example I give here is my mom, comma, who loves movies, comma, is coming over today. So a non-essential clause, it's basically basically the thing with it is that whatever's in between the commas, you could take that out and it would still make sense, right? With the example I've had would just be my mom's coming over today. But you, for some reason, you want to give us this other piece of information. So you set it off with the commas like this, but it could be removed and the sentence would still work perfectly fine. That's why it's called non-essential. Okay, so this person's question, should we avoid them or use them less? I don't think so. I think they're fine. I mean, if you do any kind of sentence structure over and over again, it could get repetitive maybe, but I wouldn't avoid it or use it less than anything else. I think it's perfectly fine. You just got to make sure that you set it off with commas on both sides of that non-essential part, right? So I think it's totally fine. I think it can be cool a lot of the times, but again, maybe it could get repetitive if you like, if you did it in every single sentence or something. But I approve of them, so has my stamp of approval. I'm good with it. Okay, next question. This person said, when using commas to list four nouns, do you need a comma between the third and fourth word? For example, winter, spring, summer, and fall. And they have commas after winter, spring, and summer. So basically what you're asking about here is the comma, like when we have a list of things, the comma before the and, right? For like whatever the last thing is, comma and. And I'm pretty sure that this is a stylistic choice. I think both ways are correct. I think this is technically called the Oxford comma, you know, and I believe that both ways are technically correct, and it's more just what you like better. So for me, I always do it with the comma, like how you have here: winter, comma, spring, summer, winter, comma, spring, comma, summer, comma, and fall. That's how I would do it, but I just like the way it looks better like that. I just did it like that when I was a kid. But you could leave that last comma off if you wanted to. Oxford comma. Next question. Is always David and I? Is it ever appropriate to use David and me? Good question. Good question here. Because I think that's like people who think that they're like grammar snobs, but who aren't really. They love to correct people on shit like that. Oh, it's David and I, you mean? So here's where you would use them. There are situations where David and me is correct. It's not always David and I. It's because of the difference between I and me, right? There must be a difference between these two things, or else why would we have both of them? So they mean the same thing, you know? Basically, they are a different part of speech, is what it is. I'm gonna try not to get too technical with this, although I could. Um, but they are a different part of speech. So I is a subject, whereas me is an object. So a subject and an object in a sentence. If we had a sentence, I threw the ball. In that sentence, I is the subject because it's the one doing the thing, and ball is the object because that is the thing that something's being done to. I throw the ball, right? So in that case, we have I. So there are times when you want to refer to yourself, but when you're the object of the sentence, right? Uh, can you pick that up for me? Can you get me something from the other side of the room? Because in those sentences, you is the subject and me is the object, right? Can you get me something from the store? You are doing the thing. Me, you're doing it for me, right? So that's the difference. So if David if David and you are the subject of the sentence, and it's David and I. If you are the object of the sentence, it's David and me. So this would be like David and I are going to the store, right? Same thing as I'm going to the store. Um, but then if we said, do you want to go to the store with David and me? Because the same thing I did before. You is the subject in that sentence. So David and blank are not the subject, they are the object. So it's David and me. Do you want to go there with David and me? So there you go. That's how that works. I, subject, me, object. So maybe, if you have any annoying grammar people in your life, you can swat them away with that one. Another question here, another good question. This person asked, when should affect be used instead of effect? So this is another one where I think there's a kind of understandable technical explanation. Affect with an A and effect with an E. So effect with an E is a noun. Affect with an A is a verb. So with effect, we could say, the effect of the earthquake was that a bunch of houses fell down, right? Because it's the effect, that's a noun. Whereas we could say, the death of my loved one affected me greatly, because that's a verb. That's how it affected me. The effect of something, how you are affected by something. Noun versus verb. That's the difference there. All right, those are the questions I had. If you do have another burning question that you just didn't get to post, because I know I asked for them to be posted by Monday, and that's not a lot of time. So if you still have one, you could post it there, and maybe I'll respond just through the forum or the discussion thread there. All right, so let me see. I'm just going to go through these. Okay, so what I gave you on my document, I gave you commas, I gave you titles of things, and I gave you colons. I think these are the ones you should focus on, probably commas most of all. I think that most of the problems that students generally have with writing relates to commas. The first one, I have another thing I want to post. I'm going to try to remember to post this. I have another thing about comma splices, which connects to run-on sentences. I feel like in Composition 1, I have a lot of people who have problems with run-on sentences, maybe not as much in this class, but the biggest problem I see when students, are saying that they get told that they do run-on sentences is using a comma where you should be using a period or something else. So I think this comes from text messaging because in text messaging we'll separate two separate thoughts, but we'll just separate them with a comma because it's rude to use periods when you're texting. I definitely do this when I'm texting, but so a comma splice is when you basically have two things that could be their own sentences, right? You have two independent clauses, just means that they could be their own sentences, and you're sticking them together with only a comma. You can't do that. It doesn't work. You can only use a comma if it's an independent clause, meaning something that could be its own sentence, and a dependent clause, something that could not be its own sentence. Um, yeah. So basically, you need to look at what you have on both sides of the comma and ask yourself if those could be their own sentences. And if they could, then you can't just use a comma. You have to use and or but or make it two separate sentences. So I'll try to post something else about that. But that's commas, places, and run-on phrases. So yeah, I tried to just list here, like I think the most common uses for commas. There's definitely other ones. This isn't exhaustive. Oh, and I should say, if you really have trouble with grammar, or if you ever have a professor who is giving you shit about it, I would probably just go ahead and buy one of these grammar handbooks. Basically, everything I know about grammar comes from the one that I have. I don't think I have it around here, but it's called the McGraw-Hill Handbook of English Grammar and Usage, is what it's called. McGraw-Hill is the company. And I like that one. I find it to be pretty easy to understand. There's a lot of examples, which to me is the best thing, is the examples. That helps us the most, I think. So that's why I tried to give you this document with examples on it. So yeah, if it's really a problem for you, I would buy one of those books and try to look through that. But I do think if you can eliminate, like, if you can follow these rules that I have here about commas, I think you can eliminate like 90% of mistakes related to commas that you might have. And I think they all make sense. I don't want to spend too much time. I already explained a non-essential clause. That one can be a little confusing, but I think I explained it. Opening phrase is when we use things like however, or on the other hand, or the examples I gave here. Leading into a quote I want to talk about. So you need a comma when you lead into a quote, right? I have here, the author writes, comma, I am a dumb idiot, in quotation marks. That was my great example for you. So the thing with a comma leading into a quote, you only need it if you lead into a quote in this way with a verb. If you say the author says or states or writes or yells or whatever. If you introduce it with a verb like that, you need a comma right after it, and then you go into your quotation marks. However, sometimes I've seen people, and and it's kind of a good move where you can like incorporate the quote into your own sentence without saying the author says or whatever. And if you incorporate it into your own sentence, then you don't need a comma. So it's not just, oh, I'm using a quote, I need a comma there. It's only if you set it up with the author writes or says or states or whatever. So that's that one. Okay, the one with the middle of the sentence. This one, I feel like there's a couple of ways to look at this. There's like keywords to look for. If you have a sentence that starts with if you have a sentence that starts with if and it's a whole sentence, you're going to need a comma in the middle. Like I said, if you're going to the store, pick up some milk. And I think this is the one where like you might have heard this before, that like, oh, if you feel like a pause in a sentence, that means you need a comma. That is definitely not always true, and I wouldn't always go by that. There's definitely times where it doesn't work. But I think for this case, in terms of when you need them in the middle of the sentence, you can kind of feel it. If you're going to the store, pick up some milk. Like there is that break there where the comma goes. And it's like if then. If you have any kind of construction like that, you need the comma in the middle. And then obviously, if you use things like but, I would go to the store, but I am too tired. And this is what I was trying to say. Maybe this shows us too what I was trying to say about comma splices. So like I would go to the store, comma, but I am too tired. If we took the first part of that, I would go to the store, that could be its own sentence, right? That's an independent clause. But after the comma, but I am too tired, that can't really be its own sentence. So that's why the comma works like that, So yeah, that's when we need it in the middle of a sentence like that. So yeah, and then like I said, if you can follow those rules, and I would also say about commas that don't use a comma unless you have a reason to do it. That's kind of a good place to start. Is like unless it fits into one of these rules, you probably don't need it. Or you might be using it as a way of splicing your sentences instead of using but or and or making it into two separate sentences. You might be doing a run-on sentence basically. If you have a comma there and you're not sure why, you might just be using it to like mark basically a change in thought, the way that we do when we're texting, and that's going to lead you to run-on sentences. Okay, titles of things. I think this is pretty easy. And I've probably left this comment on your essays if you haven't been doing it this way. But basically, there's two options when we're talking about the title of something. There's italics and there's quotation marks. You might have done underlines in the past, but underlining I think is really only used for when you're writing by hand, you know. So I think like that's why they teach us like that in elementary school because we're writing all our stuff by hand. You can't do italics by hand, so you have to do an underline. Um, but yeah, it's italics or quotations. So basically, the way this works is that like the biggest unit of thing gets italics. A book, a newspaper, a journal, a novel, a play, a movie. All of that gets italics. The things that get quotation marks are like smaller things that can be contained in the things that get italics. For instance, an article or an essay might appear in a newspaper. So the newspaper is the larger thing that gets italics. The essay is the smaller thing that gets quotations. So like a chapter of a book or poems, those are smaller things, or like a short story, right? This is why a short story gets italics, because a short story is going to appear in a larger book of short stories. So if you're talking about the name of the whole book of short stories, that gets italics. The specific short story gets quotation marks. So yeah, I think that's that. Okay, last thing I'll say is colons. So maybe the first thing to know about colons is that you could just get away with not using them. You could probably write your entire college career and never use a colon and be fine. But they can be kind of fun. So I gave you two different ways. I'll try to explain these because they're a little confusing. So both of them I think are related to like when we talk in such a way where we kind of set up what's coming next, or when we write in that way, you know. So introducing a list is one. So I have my example here. There are three things I need from the store, colon, apples, beer, and bleach. Um, so the reason that you use the colon is it's because you started that way. There are three things I need, and then after the colon, you give us the things, right? So it's because you set it up in that particular way that you can use the colon and then give the list. Similar for the other one, which is adding emphasis, which is doing the same thing, but you're not giving a list basically. So I said there was only one thing standing in Batman's way, colon, the Joker. So it's the same thing where you're setting that up beforehand, right? Or even if I said like, you know, I saw something really frightening today, the Joker. That would also have a colon there. It's because you're setting it up, and almost always you have to use the word something or the word thing or something to do that, because it's basically having a part of the sentence where you're setting up what comes right after the colon. So that can be a cool way to talk or write sometimes. So you might want to do that. But again, you could probably never do that and be fine. All right, last thing I'll say for this video, semicolons. I would avoid semicolons. They're just not necessary. You could absolutely get away with never using a semicolon in college. I probably didn't. I honestly probably never used a semicolon. Um, I'll get the way that you're supposed to use them is that this is actually going back to what I was saying about comma splices. When you have two independent clauses, two things that could be their own sentences, one way you can stick them together is with a semicolon. So basically, you do this if you have like, yeah, two things that could be their own sentences, but they're like related for some reason. You want to put them together. So they could be their own sentences, but instead you give them a semicolon like that because they're connected to each other for some reason. So again, could be fun sometimes. I never really did it. You don't really have to. And that's semicolons. So yeah, like I said, if you have any more grammar questions, you can go ahead and drop them in that discussion, and I'll try to give some answers. But yeah, I think that's what I got for now. See you.